If we could have silence now, please. For our prologue today, can't remember the name, Prelude, I've chosen Ode to Joy, the Beethoven famous end of a movement, and it's played by the Strauss Orchestra, led by André Rieu in Maastricht. And I suggest you might listen very close to the music. Some of you will know it already, but if you don't, we could use it. We're going to have a go at singing it ourselves a bit later in the service. Amazing music and amazing words too, if you understand the German. It's about joy being like a goddess that inspires the whole human race. And it ends with the lovely inclusion of everybody. It says, all mankind are brothers plighted, where thy gentle wings abide. And some of us would choke now at all mankind being called brothers, leaving all the sisters out. And so it's now used as part of the European Union. It's their union anthem, but it doesn't have the words. Not universal. The tuners, they all write their own words to it. And I'd like to start on that note. This is a service, I hope, where we will feel that all mankind are brothers and sisters plighted, and that all will feel welcome. And I'd like to welcome first our people who are attending by Zoom. We are glad that after the days of COVID, we got one benefit, and that was that we now extend our congregation to those who are unable to make it here. But I also welcome those who do make it here. Sometimes we feel a little lonely, but this is only half of our team. And so I welcome you as well. I welcome a few visitors who are here. I don't know the visitors on Zoom, but we welcome them as well. For me, the Unitarian Church has been my spiritual home for years. I used to be a Methodist and shared a lot of their beliefs, but I choked on one of them. That was, they insisted that you believe in God. I'm a Christian atheist, and so every time I go to the Methodist Church, I sort of choke and think, shall I stand up and pretend to support this, or shall I just hide under the seat? And that was why I came here and felt very welcome. I never regretted it. This chalice is our symbol of our life together, and it's our sign of our hopes and joys which we join in. One of our chalice readings, which I should have brought this morning but forgot, says that when you bring in your joys, remember also that others alongside you are in sorrow and grief. But if you are in sorrow or grief, remember also that some of you are it's a happy day for some and not for others. I invite you to join in our covenant. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is the sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony. Thus do we covenant with each other. This reading is called the Desiderata, and lots of you ought to know it well. Go placidly amid the noise and haste, and remember what peace there may be in silence. As far as possible, without surrender, be on good terms with all persons. Speak your truth quietly and clearly, and listen to others. Even the dull and ignorant, they too have their story. Avoid loud and aggressive persons, they are vexations to the spirit. If you compare yourself with others, you may become vain and bitter, for always there will be greater and lesser persons than yourself. Enjoy your achievements as well as your plans. Keep interested in your own career. However humble, it is a real possession in the changing fortunes of time. Exercise caution in your business affairs, for the world is full of trickery. But let this not blind you to what virtue there is. Many people strive for high ideals, and everywhere life is full of heroism. Be yourself, especially do not feign affection, neither be cynical about love. For in the face of all aridity and disenchantment, it is as perennial as the grass. Take kindly the counsel of the years, gracefully surrendering the things of youth. Nurture strength of spirit to shield you in sudden misfortune, but do not distress yourself with imaginings. Many fears are born of fatigue and loneliness. Beyond a wholesome discipline, be gentle with yourself. You are a child of the universe, no less than the trees and stars. You have a right to be here. And now let's sing our dedication song. It's number 131 in our book, Love Will Guide Us. And this is also used to be a traditional place where we take our offering around the church. And I asked our treasurer, would he object if we took an offering virtually? And he said, no, put our donation, our bank account number in, and they can make a donation. And there's the numbers at the bottom of the bulletin. But let's sing our hymn, Love Will Guide Us. My address today on the theme, Global Warming, an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. The image of an ambulance at the bottom of a cliff is a common one in politics. Left-wing and right-wing politicians both use it, but for different policies. Left-wing politicians use it to say, let's not get hard on criminals, let's spend money on fixing the social background that made them that way. And right-wing politicians use it to say, let's not throw our money at unemployed people, let's spend it on getting people back into jobs. The National Party made a speech to this effect just last week. I personally think there is a place for both. It is a little bit stupid to just see it as a one-sided issue. Sometimes we do need to look to the long term, and we call that the fence at the top of a cliff. And sometimes we need compassion right here and now, and we want an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. And global warming is a strong example. There are short-term and long-term things that both need to be done. One example of that I got from such a faraway place that my mind is slightly boggled, but it's a disaster that happened 2,000 years ago. The Bible records it in great detail. And they had the same argument about which was more important. It's a story on the last week of the life of Jesus. It's in Mark's Gospel. Jesus was heading for Jerusalem for the last time in his life. He had enemies who wanted to kill him, and he knew it. He had been tipped off by friends. Be careful, don't go down there. Herod is out to get you, but he went all the same. And on his last journey there, he looked at Jerusalem from across the valley and wept over it because he could see disaster brewing for the whole city. The disaster was that the Jews of his time were very much divided on how to react to the Roman occupiers. Some of his friends were zealots. These were the people planning a rebellion. One of his own 12 disciples was Simon the Zealot. And on the other side, there were lots of people who actually worked for the Romans and got rich out of it. And one of them was a Jesus disciple, Matthew. He was a tax collector. How the two people could have ended up in the same group is mind-boggling. It shows you how inclusive Jesus was. This first slide shows a picture of Jesus with a group of friends in that week. And the woman came in and she is crying. And she bought a jar of extremely expensive perfume and began pouring it on Jesus' head. A most startling thing. Some people would be embarrassed by it. One of the friends was. He said, "What a waste. This perfume could have been sold. It was worth about a year's salary in those days." He said the money would be better used to feed the poor. He was a man with a long-term view. But the woman had a short-term view. The reason she was showing her grief was she knew that her hero was about to be killed. And so Jesus defended her. He said, "Leave her alone. You can feed the poor at any time you like. But right now, she has done a beautiful thing for me, preparing my body for burial." Was he being short-sighted? Not at all. He was looking at the short-term disaster for himself, but he was also looking at the long-term disaster for Jerusalem. And this woman was a great support to him. The details of this story are probably fiction. It was written 30 years later, and the disaster on Jerusalem had already happened, just happened. And the people who wrote about it were actually writing at that very time. So they were possibly eyewitnesses to the destruction of Jerusalem, and they were putting their own thoughts into the mouth of Jesus. They said Jesus would have anticipated this happening. And in this version, Jesus said, "When you see Jerusalem surrounded with armies, head for the hills." And they did just that. But the Jews of that time were following a different dream. They stayed in Jerusalem, got surrounded by the Roman army, and were defending the city. They accused the Christians of disloyalty. It was part of the splitting of those two religions. And they both had a point. The Christians had a point. It was stupid to stay there and get killed. The Jews had a point. It was their temple, and they wanted to defend it to the last ditch. They still remember that event with their Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. That wall is the last bit of the temple that was left after the Romans had flattened it. I was struck by this parallel between this story of the destruction of Jerusalem and with events of our own time. A couple of weeks ago, I read a report prepared by the United Nations and the Red Cross, and they were writing about a disaster of global warming, and they said it would affect the Sahara Desert, it would affect the Horn of Africa, Southern Asia, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. That these regions in particular were not having a disaster in the future, they're having a disaster right now. Our world has mainly been taking a long-term approach to global warming, saying how icebergs are melting and islands are disappearing under the sea. But this report says those regions are already in serious trouble. In Africa alone, 36 million people are on the brink of death and might not survive this year. Other areas might last 5 years, but humans cannot last long in the conditions they face right now. A news item on 3 News last week dealt with the same issue without quoting this report. They showed the painful videos of this disaster. These are all shots from Kenya, just one of the affected areas. I got these shots from Reuters. They covered the same incident and had lots of pictures about it. And it's basically the same story. Each of these stories is about a disaster here and now. The next shot shows a cow in a dried up water pan. The main cause of the disaster is drought. The next slide shows goats in a puddle in a dried water bank. The goat herders came to this area looking for a traditional area to get drink, and there was no drink except for this small pond. And one of the goat herders is having a swim there. The next slide is hard to recognize, but this is the carcass of an elephant. Another slide showed a huge plain of elephant bodies. Kenya for years has been fighting against poachers who kill elephants for their tusks. But now that is no longer a concern. There are 20 times as many elephants dying of starvation. There is just no grass for them. One subspecies of elephants is on the way to being extinct. Many mother elephants are now unable to produce milk to feed their children. Some human mothers are also unable to produce milk for their children. Some children die from heat before they are born. That's part of the story of a long, hard famine. Another photographer knows the grim fact that the death of grazing animals meant an easy time for predators. The prey animals are losing energy. The lions and vultures are having a feast. But I was shocked at another aspect that is referred to in this story, but not pictured. It seems to me that these vultures are doomed as well. When their food supply runs out, there will be no more vultures. That process has started now. Some reports suggest it could take 5 years to run its course. Flashing back to the time of the Bible, they also were starving under a circle of Roman soldiers stopping any food or water from being brought in. And the gospel writer quotes Jesus as saying, "It will be dreadful for pregnant women and women who are breastfeeding their babies." When someone asked him when it would happen, he said, "Where the bodies are, there the vultures will gather." Exactly those things are the result today. But how much gloom can you cope with? The Kenyan people are fighting back, helped by aid from the United Nations and the Red Cross, who wrote this report. Church organisations are also sending money and staff in for causes such as schooling. The next picture is a strange one. These cows are dying, but they're not going to be buried. They're being taken to market on a truck. Meals from these animals is not your usual source of food, but it is high in nutrients. So they are now processing this to serve to people who are suffering malnutrition. And Kenyan people are also building a fence at the top of the cliff. Kenya has always been a meat-eating country. It's very popular. Not all people can afford it, but wealthy people like it. But they are now turning away from meat and starting to become vegetarian. And some are taking the next step of becoming vegans. They may be driven partly by cost, but also concern for the environment. They're going to be reducing their footprint by becoming vegetarians. They are more far-sighted than most of us. And at the bottom of the cliff, people are being rescued. The next shot is a malnourished child, but it is a picture of hope as well, because that child is in a clinic receiving professional help. The next shot is also of a malnourished child, but it is being fed by a special diet supplement designed to replace the mother's milk. The next hopeful shot is an elephant mother and her baby. They are in clover, literally. I didn't read the story behind this picture, but it shows that there are still areas in Kenya where there is grass, and this particular elephant and baby are doing well. The next one is a mixture of sadness and good luck. These 3 baby elephants are orphans, but they appear to be thriving. And unlike human babies, they've learned to hold their own bottles. Very clever. And their keepers seem to be enjoying their work. The reasons were given in this story around this photo. It says babies, elephants, adapt to humans very well, and vice versa. Humans love looking after baby elephants. It's compassion in the middle of disaster. And this picture of children with a jerry can full of water is one of a number of things that Kenyans are doing on even mostly children. These stories are. I don't know if photographers are particularly attracted by children, but a lot of children are doing helpful things. For instance, not shown in this picture, children are going to school in outdoor schools with just shelters over them from the sun, still going to school. One story that particularly struck me by its imagination, there was a teenager who has set up his own disaster warning system. The government is sending out disaster warnings to people, warning where the weather is going to be worse and how they can prepare for it. But the people in this teenager's village don't speak English, so he's translating the message and passing it on to his people. It doesn't say how he passed them on, but I suspect he was broadcasting it on radio and saving lives. There's a teenager and one boy processed. And the child, as I said, is carrying a can of water, and they look like they're enjoying, despite the fact that they are in survival mode. My conclusion is that all these people are at the bottom of the cliff, and they're helping others who are also at the bottom of the cliff in desperate situations. We could be supporting their work. And that's the guts of the report from the United Nations and Red Cross. And breaking it down, the report that went with this story has a series of 5 recommendations. I was looking forward to adding that at the end of this address, but surprisingly, the reporters who cover this don't tell you what the 5 recommendations are. But adding a few different reports together, I can get some of the answer. They say that there needs to be better early warning systems. There needs to be better funding for these local relief workers. That we should not be shipping emergency food to these countries because there's a huge waste and loss to destination by shipping it. Send the money there, they can buy the food if we give them the money. More training for local relief workers. More thermal heat shelters. I've never heard of them yet, but you often in these pictures see a sort of tent that people sheltering from the sun in. The heat tent is not giving them much protection, especially designed roof. How it's designed, I don't know, but it insulates it from the heat as well. Another one was changing the school calendar so that children can go to school at a time which is less dangerous, possibly, I don't know, maybe in the evening. Anyway, change the calendar was one of the 5 recommendations. And the last one I picked up was lowering the goal for temperature rises. There was a Paris Accord some years ago, and it set a benchmark date and said all countries must aim to not exceed global warming by more than 2%. And this report says that 2% is too high. We should aim to get it lower, down to 1.5%. And it tells you how many millions of lives will be saved by that. But what a huge task. How could we cut our carbon footprint from 2... anyway, it's going to be a hard thing to do. And I'll note that is not an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. That is a fence at the top of the cliff. That's a forward-looking part of the claim. So they are not totally ambulance people. And lastly, I wondered who this report is going to be sent to. I got a hold of it on the 10th of October, and I thought this is a good topic for an address, and put it in my shelf, and I only dug it out last week and to write it up. And I did a double take when I read that it's going to be sent to a United Nations committee called the COP27. And it's a UN forum that has met once a year to consider the environment. And you'll never guess when it starts. It starts on the 6th of November. And I thought, well, I just wrote this up in time. It's going to happen tomorrow. And our own Environment Minister, James Shaw, will be there. New Zealand has been criticised for Jacinda Ardern not going there. And I must say I agree with that criticism. I'm sure James Shaw can speak as good an argument as she can, but her public reputation would give it much more weight. But anyway, this is obviously going to be in the news over the next week or two. The thing goes on for 2 weeks, and we possibly could do something about it. What could we do? One thing occurred to me: we could, as a church, we could send a donation once we find from the UN who to send it to. But anyway, that's the subject I suggest for our discussion. What could we do? And maybe you might like to talk about what are the most appropriate things. Do we identify with getting early warning systems in? Do we identify with providing more food? Or do we identify with changing our budget? We could be writing letters to the paper about this once we hear what the government is doing. I suggest we should take our tip from the government, not necessarily agreeing with them, but saying, yeah, we agree with Mr. Shaw, that's what we do, or we disagree with Mr. Shaw, we think you should do more. I think that would be a good sort of focus. But if you can work on that, let's have, say, 10 minutes. Well, hang on, I'm beating the gun. It's time to play our next song, which is by the Rivers of Babylon. This also shows a disaster scene. The Jewish people are being taken to exile in Babylon, and they're carrying their menorah with them, their 7 candlesticks, and they're saying, how can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? You could sing if you like. The words will be on the screen. And now let's join together in the words for Extinguishing the Chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.